Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Jon Sealy. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so very much for being here today. Jon Sealy is the author of The Whiskey Baron, The Edge of America, and The Merciful, as well as the craft book So You Want to Be a Novelist. He lives in Richmond, Virginia, and is the publisher of Haywire Books. So let's just hop right into talking about your newest novel, The Merciful. Please tell me about the book.
Sure. So it is I guess, kind of literary crime novel about a hit and run that happens, a killing of a bicyclist in Low Country, South Carolina. And the novel kind of follows a handful of characters over the course of a trial and exploring the kind of aftermath of it. So I sort of describe it as like a morality play about this event, and it kind of, tries to give you the, sort of all sides of the situation, and kind of show the complexity of this thing that's happened to this small town.
Yeah, and you do a really interesting job showing those multiple perspectives. I think what's wonderful about fiction is you really can kind of see the bigger picture of people as we all come to these moments. And while it does move back and forth in time, these multiple perspectives like also really illuminate as they explore the situation, as they explore this hit and run. And in fact, when I was reading the novel, the pacing almost felt like floating a river, right? Like there's moments of rapids where you get like pushed along, and then there's sort of these swirling eddies where you kind of
Yeah.
pause and swirl around a little bit and then are moved forward. And so I was wondering if you could just tell me a little bit more about why you decided to tell the story this way.
Um, well, so the story has a frame narrator. It opens with this guy who is very much like myself, a writer who has discovered that his old college roommate is the has been is the alleged perpetrator of this event. And he's kind of, the narrator is sort of sliding into middle age and is sort of thinking back and thinking about his friend and some of the, divergent paths people take, and doesn't really know how to process this sort of thing that has happened to his friend, because he's seeing the headlines, one narrative being drawn, which is the guy, hit this woman on a bicyclist and drove off, and he's saying it's he thought he hit a deer and he thought it was an accident, whatever. And so, of course, the narrative that the narrator is seeing is one of his friend being, just this horrible person, a coward, and just probably out drunk driving, and just all the stuff. And the narrator kind of is having to square that with the very decent guy he went to college with. And I think I've known a lot of people who have run into a similar kind of situation where, if you live long enough, people around you or people you cross paths with are going to, some of them are going to have problems like that. And you're going to have to kind of square these two divergent sides of a personality. So this narrator kind of goes in novelistically and is really just trying to understand, that tension between the guy he knew and the guy who's being portrayed in the headlines. So I made a frame like that because I think the novel in a lot of ways is about storytelling, or it is about the way we frame a narrative. So there's several, ways of stories getting framed within the book. And I have this kind of thesis that as a fiction writer, that all stories are lies, precisely because you have to frame them and give them a point of view. But by doing that, you are advancing an agenda and trying to, put a box around something that is, there's more to the story. So I kind of gave a little window into like there being more behind the story. And so that's why I kind of gave these different perspectives. So you get the prosecutor, you get the defense attorney, you get the perpetrator, and then you get some of the victim and her family and friends, just to kind of give multiple sides of the story, to try to give you a more complete picture of this incident that is ultimately unknowable.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think you, in the book, sort of played with this, like in some of the things I noticed too, like the judge is one of the characters that you spend a little bit of time with in the book. And I'm going to read a quote back to you. I hope that's okay. I know
Sure.
it's always so weird to hear your words back to you, but the judge says, "There's always more than one side to a story, or a position, or a case. My job is to understand every side. The truth sometimes exists on the fringes, not always, but sometimes." And
Mhm.
I find that as a reader and as a writer, that is also really true. And like what one of the powers of reading and writing is that we can sort of explore this truth on the fringes, which sometimes, kind of like you were saying, feels like you could almost touch it, but not quite hold it. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to, like, was your experience as you wrote The Merciful? Is that your experience as a reader and as a writer?
Um, well, I think sure. Um, I mean, I think what fiction does, to my mind, why I love fiction and what it does that no other real art form can do quite so precisely, is brings you inside the head of somebody else. I mean, I think that's the nonfiction can do that to a certain degree, and that a historian or biographer can project and say, oh, but it's still, you can't really fact check what was somebody's inner thoughts. But with fiction, that's what the job of it is to show you consciousness. Um and I think that is part of the writing process. Is when you have your character, you kind of have to get into them to some degree, like an actor would. And um and then when you get into them, I mean, if you're going to inhabit somebody, you really have to kind of get with them and understand their view on the world. And sometimes that's, if you're doing your job right, that can be different from how you see things. And so I think I mean, Keats called that quality negative capability, when he wrote a letter praising Shakespeare for this capability of, saying, like, okay, when you read Shakespeare's plays, where is Shakespeare in them? I mean, you have fools, you have villains, you have kings. Those are all various different people, but where's the bard? And I think that's the job of the fiction writers, to disappear to some degree and let go of your own self. And that's, I think, part of the process. And one thing I was very happy with this book was being able to kind of put that on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do a fantastic job of getting that on the page. And so, as in your intro, I mentioned you have two other books. So, The Merciful is your third book. You have also written The Whiskey Baron and The Edge of America. And I would love to hear, were there any lessons that you learned through writing your first two books that you brought to writing The Merciful?
um well, sure. And I actually have a couple of other books that are just sitting in a drawer. I mean, I think the first one, the first novel I wrote, I never published, but I mean, I think the first one, it's just an exercise in, can you do it? Can you sustain a narrative for 300 pages? Um, and then, you learn something new with each one. So with the Whiskey Baron, well, with the first novel I'd written, I'd sent it out to some agents, and they said, "Oh, this is too quiet. We don't know what to do with this." And so I said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to write something that's a little louder. I'm going to throw a dead body in, and I'm going to make it some moonshiners and all the rest of that to make it sound more exciting." So that was one lesson: is it's got to have some kind of hook, that you can, a concept of some sort. I think something I've kind of learned to do over the years is handling time. So I think something that I know a lot of first novelists do, I think it might be a pretty instinctive thing, is to just have a lot of time go by. So you end up with these sort of rookie mistakes, where you have these characters driving around in cars, or sitting around thinking about things in the shower, or time passing, and you have 2 months go by, and it's just somebody staring out the window at the leaves changing. And sometimes the narrative drags when that happens. I mean, there are a lot of good novels that where time passes and it's just fine, but I think for beginning novelists, a good tip is to try to compress it. So with the Whiskey Baron, I had a book that languished, and it went on for 3 or 4 months, and I compressed the time to 2 weeks, and just making everything happen within a period of 2 weeks increased the I think the tension and the readability. So I kind of that was um, sort of a structural thing. So this novel, The Merciful, covers the course of a trial, which is a finite period of time. And it's also really largely a matter of weeks. I mean, there are some flashbacks and stuff, but it's, kind of keeping the narrative contained, I think, is something that you learn. And then I think just as a human being, I mean, beyond just putting down words on the page, one thing that's sort of nice about being a novelist is you get better at it as you get older, which is, your back starts hurting and you can't lift as much weight as you could, and you're not as agile as you were. And sometimes, wounds take longer to heal and your brain doesn't operate as quickly and everything else that sucks about getting older. But as a novelist, you get better because you have more experience with dealing with people, you have more experience with dealing with life. And, there's just more stuff that you can put onto the page, which I think is sort of a nice profession for aging with.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing those life lessons to the page and to your writing and to your books and all of those lessons along the way. Which leads me to my last question. So, in addition to being a novelist, you are also the publisher of Haywire Books. And so I would just love to hear a little bit more about Haywire Books and your role as publisher, and how knowing more about publishing has influenced your writing, and vice versa, how your writing has influenced your work as a publisher.
Sure. Well, I started Haywire Books in 2019, so it's newish. Really, that was because I was noticing a gap in the market, at least on the author side. There's this term called midlist. So if you if you go to a bookstore, when you can go to a bookstore, you'll see, on the shelf, there's largely two types of books. There are debut novels from new, fresh, exciting voices, and then there are books from well-established, famous people, right? So you have Delia Owens and you have Stephen King, right? And then everybody in the middle that sells somewhere between 2,000 and 20,000 copies just kind of gets lost. And that's just a challenge of our era in fiction writing, I think, is that sort of middle period where you're trying to build an audience. And in the Southern tradition in particular, so I live in Virginia, but I'm from South Carolina. I don't think too much about this anymore, but, I've kind of coming out of what you would call Southern fiction. There aren't too many publishers interested in that these days. There are a lot of publishers smaller independent publishers that specialize in Appalachian fiction, but Southern fiction in particular there's a gap. So midlist fiction writers in the South, there's not really too many forums for you. So I started Haywire Books to try to fill that gap a little bit. And I was thinking, people with second, third, fourth novels, it might be a bridge between their debut experience and building a big enough audience to get into New York. But I mean, it's a bit like, they talk about how laws get made as sort of like watching the sausage get made.
Sure.
Publishing a book is somewhat similar in that, of course, half of Haywire Books' existence has been during a pandemic, which has turned everything upside down. So unfortunately, I built my business plan around book tours with independent booksellers around the Southeast, and all of that's kind of on hold. And then you also just sort of run into the sort of, they call it economics the dismal science, and the reason is because there are just very firm walls that you run into. And just one small example, if you go back and look at old books. I've got a bunch of books from the 70s, 80s, 90s on my shelf, and you look at them and you look at, okay, this book was a paperback published in 1990. You look at the price on it, and went through an exercise, and I plugged in a bunch of old book prices into an inflation calculator and found that if books had kept up with the price of inflation, hardbacks right now should be running about $40 and paperbacks should be $20 to $25. And they have not kept up with the price of the hard materials, paper and other stuff. And that's partly effect of, consumer demand and all the things that people can do with their time. So you kind of have to square this thing where, where's the money coming from, that you don't necessarily have to think about on the author side of things too much. Just continuing to try to work through those, some of those issues. And, fortunately, I've published a few good books. I mean, the most recent book on the catalog was Heather Bell Adams' novel, The Good Luck Stone, and it's a, you know, poor thing. We had to put it out. We put it out in July, right in the middle of the everything. But you know, it's just a beautiful book, and I'm just glad to have it out in the world. It's very, very rewarding as a publisher to be able to put stuff out into the world, and it's kind of feels like you're putting a stake in the ground and just saying, hey, this kind of stuff matters, and you know, here it is. So that's this broad story of Haywire Books for the moment. We'll see what the future holds, but
Indeed, with our crystal balls. Yes, indeed. So yes, well, thank you. Thank you so very much for, I know writing is a labor of love and publishing is definitely a labor of love. So thank you very much for like putting in that time for getting those voices out into the world and for writing The Merciful. So must readers, please do check out Haywire Books and check out Jon Sealy's newest novel, The Merciful. And Jon Sealy, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a great day, and thank you for hosting.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you.